I'm making a beaded ornament cover, and I wanted to show how I add my beads to the knitting. I've done this on the flatbed knitting machine before, but it's a little bit different on this machine, but it's basically the same. I'm using a piece of Fireline so that I don't have to use a needle. It's stiff enough where I can thread the beads and not have to use a needle. The reason I don't want to use a needle is because every single time you add a bead to the knitting, you have to take the needle out and rethread it, so I don't want to have to do that. So I've put a stopper bead on the bottom so that I can add a few beads. I don't like to put a whole lot on there, so I'll add 5 or 6 beads to this. And all I do is just thread them on. It would be faster with a needle if you were going to load up your thread with a whole bunch of beads. So let me add a few beads and I'll be right back. Just to show you what's going to be happening when I add the beads onto the knitting, basically what I'm going to do is choose the last bead on there, and I'm taking the tail and running it back through the bead from where it came out. And as you know, when you do that, this bead will slide right off the loop of this thread. But if I have the knitting trapped in there, the bead will slide onto my knitting. So that's why this works. So the next place that I need to add a bead is right here, and I'm using a tiny crochet hook. You can use your pick tool if you want to, but I find the crochet hook doesn't get hung up as bad. So I'm just going to poke it into the stitch, and it doesn't matter whether it's below or above or which direction. All we're doing is pulling this thread through. So I made a little loop here so I could pull the tail through of my Fireline. You can use a thread and needle, needle and thread, I mean, if you want to, but I like this Fireline. So now I'm going to take this tail. The stitch is secure on there. I can actually take it off the hook or the needle right now if I want to. Then I'm just kind of separate that last bead and run this tail back through that bead, grab a hold to both of those ends, and slide the bead down. And then I'm going to pull on that stitch, lift it off of the stitch, slide that bead onto the stitch, and sometimes if I'm lucky I can slip it right back onto the hook. It just depends on how tight the stitch is, but usually I have to get a tool and just separate it out and lift it back onto the needle. Sometimes I get lucky and it just slips right on there. But I don't lose stitches this way. So now both my stitch and the bead are secure, so all I have to do is grab these beads and pull my tail out. And that's all there is to it. Now when you get ready to knit these off, I'm still making eyelets along this side, but I'm knitting these off. You'll either have to lift the needle up above the latch or drop the stitch below the latch and leave the needle in work, or the easiest thing is just to hold the bead down as that needle rises so it'll drop below the latch, because most of the time it's so tight on there it wants to rise up. So I just stick my finger back there and slowly knit this round, and this is an easier way that I've found to do these beads without always losing your stitches.